So welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you guys to this session today on drinking water threats in high-income countries. When we think of water quality issues, our minds often go to developing or rapidly urbanizing regions. Yet, I think we all can appreciate that wealth and regulation don't always guarantee safety. Even in high-income countries where we have advanced treatment plants, robust standards, and strong regulatory oversight, serious and emerging threats persist. We've all seen the headlines: lead contamination in older infrastructure, PFAS showing up in our groundwater, rivers, and even treated drinking water, Legionella outbreaks linked to poorly maintained plumbing systems, and microplastics that we now detect from mountain streams to municipal taps. So today's session takes on a whole of system perspective. We're going to look at water quality across the full spectrum of from source protection and treatment to distribution and household level safety. We're going to hear from federal, state, and local actors who are each working to manage risks, modernize infrastructure, and build public confidence. Our speakers are going to present the state of the science today on key contaminants and identify actionable steps to mitigate risks. Ultimately, this session is about learning and action. We're going to tackle the questions of how can we strengthen our water quality management systems, how do we ensure transparent communication when problems arise, and how do we maintain and rebuild public trust and confidence in the safety of our drinking water. So I invite you to listen, to question, to engage. Let's make this a space for honest dialogue, shared learning, and practical steps towards safer, more equitable access to clean water for all communities. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Andrea. So our session today is going to be divided up into two panels, or two parts. The first one, we are going to be looking at water quality in high-income countries from both a local, state, and a federal perspective. And actually, this has been a session I've really been looking forward to because of the speakers that we have lined up. First, I want to thank everyone for coming on day 4 of the UNC Water and Health Conference. You've made it. The conference is coming to an end. I know there's been a lot of wonderful content this week. I also want to welcome all of our online participants as well, and we're excited to have you be able to join us. Today's session wouldn't be possible without a number of our organizers. So I want to give a special shout out to RTI International, who was instrumental in helping to pull this session together, LIXIL, as well as DigDeep and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Our discussion today really will remind us that even in high-income countries where regulations are very robust, and we'll learn just how robust they can be, safe drinking water is really not something that we can take for granted. To set the stage, this data comes from, slide I'm pulling up is Q2 from 2025. It's the list of water violations across the spectrum. And if you look at it, it shows that 177 million Americans live in the areas where at least one drinking water standard has been violated this year, which is a pretty incredible number, and it really shows just how complicated of the world like our speakers and our panel have to navigate. These issues cut from across all stages, from source water protection to distribution systems, and they remind us that really progress depends on collaboration from each level of government. Next, I want to help kind of frame what this federal, state, local connection really looks like. The strength of our water system really depends on the connections between the 3 levels of government. Federal agencies play an important job establishing guardrails. States then translate those into actionable policy, and then local utilities bring those policies to life, and they are on the direct lines in servicing their communities. For our first panel, we're going to be hearing from Sushma Macemore, who's the Deputy Director for Environment at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. We'll also be hearing from Monica Dodson, who's the Deputy Director for OWASA, which is the utility whose wonderful drinking water we've all been enjoying during your time here in Chapel Hill. And we're going to hear how each of these leaders navigates the complex challenges from emerging contaminants like PFAS and microplastics to the everyday realities of funding, infrastructure, and workforce needs. So with that, I will invite Sushma to come up. We'll hear 2 short presentations, and then we'll engage them in a little bit of a dialogue. So Sushma, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a while since I was here. I was talking about clean energy when I was here about 4 years ago, and that was a really exciting topic at that time and still is. I work at the Department of Environmental Quality, and those that may not be familiar with that department does is we oversee our water, air, land, marine fisheries, coastal resources, and we regulate all the sources that affect the environment in which we live and work and play. So DEQ has a unique government role as an agency. We are the regulatory agency. We are the least liked agency, as some people would say, but we also do very important work for the people of North Carolina. And that comes with it an enormous sense of responsibility related with everyday health and well-being of our residents. And my team in the Division of Air Quality, Division of Water Quality, Division of Waste Management, and Dam Safety and Land Resources every day work to issue over 40,000 permits a year, and 80,000 permits are managed on an annual basis. And what that means is that we oversee a variety of factors that influence the development of the state as a whole. So my presentation looks at what are the key drivers in the 21st century that is affecting the state of water quality in our state. So in that, let me get started. So one of the key things that's affecting water quality is the state of the growth in North Carolina. You saw as you coming in, there's development everywhere. Roads are building, buildings are being constructed, but if you go within the cities, you'll see tremendous amount of development, whether it's the mountains or the coast or somewhere in between. And part of that reason is North Carolina is a top state to do business. There are very high business incentive policies that have been put in the state, tax incentives, but also the regulatory framework and the workforce and the education system we have all have driven North Carolina to be for the 3rd time in a year in a row, top state for doing business. And that has brought in from pharmaceuticals to semiconductors to data centers to clean energy to you name it. The businesses are continuing to grow. One of the things that we do as a department is as these companies come, they have their needs. They want water, they want air quality permits, they want erosion sedimentation control permits. Just the Amazon plant, which is going to be in Richmond County, North Carolina, that plant is going to be constructed in less than 6 months. It took 6 different divisions to actually work towards the data center that's going to be in a Tier 1 county. There are a lot, you can talk a lot of pluses and minuses, but it is a tremendous project, something that we haven't seen in a long time, but we call these mega projects. The department that looked at 1 permit at a time is now looking at 5 to 6 different permits for mega projects. Prior to that, the Toyota battery plant over in Greensboro area, that took over 1,000 acres of a concrete pad. And we had to look at the wetlands impacts, and we had to look at all of the water and air quality impacts associated with that plant. Another one is Jet Zero over right here in the Cape Fear River Basin. That's going to be a massive construction project, but also a facility that's going to be using a lot of clean water, producing wastewater. It's going to be having air emission sources because they're going to be using combustion sources and chemical processes and other things. So all of this is going to affect our environment and natural resources. And part of that is North Carolina is not going to stop growing. We are 5th in the nation in terms of how our GDP has grown. And that has brought in people. People are coming in because they're jobs, but people are coming in because there's a need for a talented workforce, educated workforce. And that's been here in the RTP since the 80s and 90s. Some of us came here during that era. But there's a new generation of workers coming in. And if you see this chart, you see that over 12% of the growth since 2010 has been pretty linear. There are a lot of people moving in. Wake County alone has over 60 people moving a day. And if you look at the triangle as a whole, it's hundreds and thousands of people. And that's putting tremendous demand on infrastructure, water, roads. And as you hear from my colleague here at local government, they're having to adapt to this demand, and so is the state. The next thing this is the one that we deal with on a regular basis now is extreme weather events. Just the hurricane season this year hasn't been as bad as the past few years, but I wanted to give you a flavor of how many billion-dollar disasters North Carolina has gone through. If you look at Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina is usually the third ranked in the nation as having the highest number of weather-related incidences. And these incidences are not just a tornado here and there. These are major events that has culminated into a tremendous amount of financial burden, human health burden, and it's gotten to a point where it's affecting the quality of life and the cost of living in our state. The red line at the top is Hurricane Helene that hit North Carolina in 2024. This is being cited as second to Katrina in terms of the amount of impact and in terms of number of people affected, number of infrastructure, but the debris that is created, we're still cleaning up debris. We're still cleaning up private and public waterways. That debris has to go somewhere. Rivers are no longer where they used to be. Streams are no longer where they used to be. Roads are gone. Piping infrastructure for entire sewage systems are gone, and so are the pumping systems for clean water. And so many of these communities had to build from ground up, and many of them had to build in a resilient way. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the state is adapting to address water quality concerns. More recently, just in this area, and you may have seen, Chantel created an enormous impact on our lives here in the Triangle. I had a colleague whose mom was the one who passed away when her car was flooded over by Haw River in Pittsboro. And that was from the storm itself. She was going home after visiting him on a Sunday, and that happened. So it is something we're living on a day-to-day basis. When I was out west to look at the impact of Hurricane Helene, it hit me that I was driving over an area that was landslide had gone through twice in a row during Helene as well as this last storm. And they had fatalities, and landslides in the west are really the drivers towards fatalities. Most people that passed away were due to the landslides. So I'm showing a few pictures of what Helene left in terms of damages to our infrastructure. Here's an example of French Broad and the area surrounding it. Just imagine, we couldn't get in touch with our water utilities for about 2 weeks. There were local and federal and state folks working to just get a status update of what was happening and what was not. One of the first things we did was work with EPA to get water quality monitoring, mobile monitoring systems out there. Eventually, we had 2 mobile labs. They were designed to test for people like Monica's water, which is, as they're bringing it up, let's get it local tested so that it's good enough quality to get people on water. But most people that came to us and we opened it up with EPA was private well users. There were a tremendous number of people that have their own water supply, and they had no way to know whether their water was clean because, as you can imagine, there's petroleum in the water, there was waste in the water, debris in the water. And so that took over 6 to 7 months to get clean water out to people until we were able to get some of the plants online. And so rebuilding is a big effort in high-income countries, right? You suffer from these damages. After a long effort, the federal government did give us supplemental funding under the budget of last year. North Carolina received some of the highest because we had a lot of projects ready to go. Over $600 million were allocated to North Carolina. And I just want to show you that the left circle is about drinking water systems. We're putting most of our funds there, over $400 million, to put those systems back together. And then the clean water is for wastewater systems. $253 million would go there. And then on the right, you see $22 million being spent in decentralized septic system. This is a new concept. We proposed a pilot to the US EPA and said, the Western North Carolina, we have mountains and roads and bridges, and we're not centralized as much as we can be, and so there's a different need. And so we asked for funding to use for decentralized systems. And what does that consist of? And I just want to show you what the need was versus what we were able to fund. For the drinking water system, we had over $500 million in infrastructure rebuilding needs, and we were to fund about $400 million of that. There's over $900 million in need for wastewater systems. This is where the biggest damage was. And if you know much about wastewaters in North Carolina, the discharge from wastewater operations are discharged into waters of the state, the surface waters, the lakes, and the rivers. And that becomes, in the future, or downstream intake for drinking water supplies. And so they're very connected, and we as a state have to manage that resource. And then finally, we received over $46 million in requests for decentralized systems, and with the funding we got, we were able to fund about half of it. And so all of these projects are going to not just rebuild as they are, but rebuild in a resilient way. We asked EPA that we want North Carolina to be stronger and more adapted and better to be able to come back in a future storm, because this has happened before in Western North Carolina, and it will happen again. And so these resiliency-related efforts are going to look at how do you put those piping infrastructure back, those pumping stations back, those electric motor systems back in a way that you're not going to be inundated with flooding again. And it's not an easy thing to do because it requires a new way of thinking. Most of our water systems and towns are located right where the river floods because it's the cheapest land, or that's where everybody likes to go visit. And so moving them out of harm's way requires land and thinking and purchasing. All of that is allowable in here in terms of where that utility wants to go to make themselves more resilient for future floods. Another option is going regional. Utilities in North Carolina are going through this evaluations for one of two reasons. Smaller systems are really not able to just adapt to the increasing costs, population growth, the demand in water, and many of them are what we call distressed utilities. They just don't have the income coming in to support that. And so we did a special study under legislative authority to look at regionalization of the 421 corridor. If you know what that area is, that's the Asheboro region. And that looked at a variety of infrastructure challenges, water quality issues, there's capacity constraints with some of them, regulatory compliance. Individually, they have a hard time, but together they can address federal and state requirements. And many of them already have emerging contaminants as a key driver. And then lastly, what I wanted to show you, there's a lot of numbers here. I'm not going to go through that, but that regionalization was a first ever North Carolina study that was so comprehensive. But it looked at, on the right-hand side, you'll see the triad area. The 2030 target for growth is way more than what we see here in the triangle. And so that 2050 target is going to shows you where North Carolina is going to grow, right in the middle of the state. And in fact, that 421 corridor was cited in a Congress bill as the future of North Carolina, where majority of industries and people are going to be coming. And we were trying to get ahead of that to build a better infrastructure plan. And then finally, emerging contaminants. This is what I do on a daily basis. Over 30 to 40% of my time is spent on water quality issues that are affecting people's drinking water today on a continuous basis. For drinking water systems, we regulate all of the community-based systems. We estimate that over 3.5 million people's water in North Carolina, out of all of the systems that are listed here, are above the EPA's drinking water PFAS standards. This is part of it. There are over 250,000 private well drinkers that are also affected by it, and we support that with DHHS and our own programs for PFAS. And then with that, I'll just stop there because I know Monica is going to talk about PFAS a lot, and it is an ongoing struggle for all of us. So thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. So my name's Monica Dotson. As they said, I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the local utility, which is Orange Water and Sewer Authority, known as OWASA. I've been with OWASA for 21 years now, so I've had the pleasure of serving this community for over 20 years. So just a little bit about, let's see. Is it? Oh, this one, sorry. Okay, so OWASA is an authority, so we're a separate entity from the towns and the city. So our sole responsibilities are providing water, wastewater, and reclaimed water services to our community. And our community consists of Carborough, Chapel Hill, which includes the University of North Carolina, which is one of our largest customers. We serve a population of about 83,600 people, and we have about 23 service connections to our system. Our system is also interconnected with our neighbors, Town of Hillsborough, Chatham County, as well as the city of Durham. And these interconnections are really important because they help us support other neighboring utilities or communities, as well as their ability to be able to support us in times of emergency, as well as in times of need. So we've used these if there's been an emergency in a community situation and we need to provide water, but we also have used these in situations years ago during droughts. So we have mutual aid agreements that allow us to be able to support each other through that. Another thing I wanted to mention here was just the importance of long-term planning. And when you think about long-term planning, ensuring we have enough water supply to meet our communities in the long term is important. It can take decades to secure water sources. And so as this is something, we have a long-range water supply plan that we're looking far into the future. So currently, OWASA has enough water to meet the needs of our community based on how we expect the community to grow for the next 50 years. But we also have plans beyond those 50 years. So down here in the bottom, this is Jordan Lake. Back in the 1980s, OWASA bought some property off of Jordan Lake for the future in case we wanted to build a water treatment plant in the future. Currently, the town of Cary, Apex, has the only water intake that treats water from that water source. But we worked with something called the Western Intake Partnership, where we've partnering with the city of Durham, as well as what they call now Triad Water Authority. So we talked about centralization, we talked about partnerships. That new partnership for Triad Water serves Chatham County, Pittsboro, and Sanford. So that's a regional utility that they've developed. And so there's an effort to be able to create a new Western Intake Partnership, so a new water treatment plant to be able to meet the needs of those communities, City of Durham, and OWASA in the long term. Again, this isn't something that we expect to need for the next 50 years, but we've already developed those relationships and are a part of that process to be able to institute that when it's necessary. Another really important part for long-term planning is our capital planning. So we maintain a 5-year, 10-year, and 15-year capital planning, and a big part of this is how are we planning for and investing into aging infrastructure and the resiliency of our system. So I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. OWASA is very fortunate to be able to say that we are in full compliance with all regulations and have historically been in full compliance with all regulations. This is kind of the major ones, but there's a lot when we talk about what it's expected of the utilities to be able to meet water safety, water quality standards, monitoring requirements, as well as reporting requirements, and then the communications. Shushma talked about like the transparency, how we're keeping our communities informed of our water quality standards, and if there's an exceedance, the expectations to be transparent about that. A large part of the reason why OWASA's been so successful in meeting regulations is because we've gotten the support from our community and our board to be able to invest into our systems. That's when new regulations come in place, putting the investments we need in the treatment plants to be able to meet those new regulations. As our infrastructure ages, being able to proactively replace those systems to ensure the integrity of that has been really important. And another really important part of being able to maintain regulatory compliance is having knowledgeable, trained staff that ensures the proper operations of our systems as well as the proper monitoring and reporting. So it's a big part of why we've been able to be so successful. Every year, the American Water Works Association releases a State of the Water Industry report. And this report highlights the challenges and priorities that utilities across the nation are facing. And this is just a summary of some of the top challenges that the water industry is facing right now. And I'm going to talk about the first three for us in detail, but these certainly are ones that OWASA is preparing for. So from a capital improvement funding perspective, the primary concern from the water utility perspective is whether we have enough funding to be able to meet the needs of new regulations and aging infrastructure. 41% of the utilities that participated in this have concerns about being able to fund the requirements or the investments that are needed into their systems. And again, a lot of this is driven by new regulations. Aging infrastructure, this is one that remains to be a critical issue in the water industry. A lot of systems are reaching or exceeding their design lives, and so they're facing substantial investments in investing in their infrastructure. And then emerging contaminants and new regulations, about 45% of the people that participated in this study or the utilities that participated in this have significant concerns about PFAS and the substantial investments we need to be able to meet those regulations. Workforce challenges, just as aging infrastructure, our workforce is aging and retiring, so recruitment in our industry has been a real challenge. It takes specialized skills, and this is something we're working really hard to market this as a desirable industry to be in. I have personally always enjoyed working with water, so this was a really good fit for me. But we're trying to get out there with the schools just to let folks know that this is a desirable industry to be in. And then once you bring in those new staff is working really hard to get them trained and prepared for the challenges ahead. And then the other one is natural and human-caused hazards. So Shushma talked about natural hazards, flooding, hurricanes. Hurricane Helene and Tropical Storm Chantal that she mentioned had significant impacts on water and wastewater infrastructure. And so it's really important that systems are considering the reliability and resiliency of those systems as certainly as they're rebuilding, but as you're maintaining them going forward. And the human-caused hazards, cybersecurity. This is a big one for this that utilities are preparing for. So when you look at OWASA's capital investments program, again, I mentioned we do a 5, 10-year, 15-year look. So this is a look at our 10-year CIP, and we're looking at spending $447 million over the next 10 years. And you can see that in comparison to our typical 5-year plan. And a big part of this is installing new advanced treatment to meet PFAS needs, as well as our clear well, which is the final stage in our drinking water process, is the original clear well to our facility. So it was built back in the 1940s. It has reached its end of useful life, and it's time to replace that. So those are driving some of our big expenses over the next 10 years. And then this graph here just talks about like our 5-year plan and where those funds are being invested in. 58% of that is in rehabilitating and addressing aging infrastructure. Typically, for OWASA, 75% of our funds go into rehabilitating our infrastructure. So again, to address new regulations, more of that's going into the enhancement section there, which is 31%. So those are new technologies enhancing our systems. And then for us, 11% goes into addressing growth within our system. So PFAS. So when we talk about new regulations, I was going to talk a little bit about lead today, but I really wanted to focus on PFAS. PFAS is something that is impacting all areas of our operations within the organization. We've had an active monitoring program since 2018. We've been monitoring these different areas, not because we're required to do it, but because we wanted to be able to understand where is PFAS showing up in our systems, at what concentrations, and then as we learn more about what that means, what is our plan for being able to address those. From the drinking water perspective, we determined that we have 2 water sources. One of our water sources has elevated PFAS, and that's related to some biosolids land application practices that had happened in the past by another utility. Those biosolids were of an industrial source, so unfortunately it contaminated the water supply. And so treatment at the source isn't an option. We need to do treatment at the water treatment plant. So while we did some pilot studying to determine what our long-term treatment needs would be, we optimized our current treatment process through the use of powder-activated carbon to be able to reduce those compounds. And so the graph here at the bottom has showed where we've started with those optimization efforts and where we're sitting now. So we're very fortunate that by just optimizing powder-activated carbon, we've been able to reduce those compounds to below the MCLs. The thing, for folks that know a lot about water treatment, the thing about powder-activated carbon is, and if whoever might be going to the tour tomorrow, you'll get to see this, the powder-activated carbon captures the PFAS and it settles out in our celling process and gets captured in the solids. Those solids are then dewatered and they're put back out into the environment either through composting or through landfills. And so there's still an environmental impact that those PFAS have. And so what OWASA's looked at, as we've looked at what our long-term solutions could be, we've also looked at what types of treatments can minimize the impact back into the environment. And so we looked at ion exchange and granular activated carbon as our potential sources, of our potential long-term strategies. We settled on granular activated carbon. The benefit with granular activated carbon is that it captures the PFAS within the media. That media can then be taken out to a regeneration facility where under high heat, the PFAS portion destroyed. I think it's still to be a lot of studies on how much of it is actually destroyed, also versus what could be re-released back into the environment through the air. But this one, based on what we know now and best available technologies, has one of the least impacts into the environment. And so this is part of our long-term planning. We're looking at spending $90 million to be able to put this treatment in place. And these are just all the things that we're considering when we think about new treatment technologies. What are the costs short-term or initial investments? What are the costs long-term? How effective is it not only meeting the removal of PFAS, but how effective is it removing at all the other water quality standards? Environment impacts, where is that PFAS going to go and what are we going to do with it? And then we also think about secondary benefits. Is how does this facility impact the current treatment plant facility? So for us, we're a very small footprint, so can we fit this treatment technology within our current footprint? And we could. And then we also think about operational maintenance and complexity. Is it something that we can successfully maintain and operate long term? So this technology checked all of the boxes. PFAS is also impacting our wastewater treatment and biosolids. And as Shishma mentioned, what's really important about thinking this from a wastewater perspective is that from the wastewater treatment plant, you have the finished product is 2 things. It's cleaned water, then becomes somebody else's drinking water source, and then we have these biosolids, which historically for OWASA has been a beneficial reuse product because it's loaded with nutrients. And farmers have really enjoyed having that because they can use biosolids instead of commercial fertilizers to meet their nutrient needs. PFAS has changed that perception and the question of the safety of biosolids. And so for wastewater perspective, we have PFAS in our wastewater. We've detected PFAS in our biosolids. And more recently, we've become aware that there's 2 of our biosolids sites where some drinking water wells have come up with PFAS in them above the MCLs. We've done some work to do some additional testing. Some have had some in it, some have had no information, no detections in it. So the results are inconsistent. So we don't have a really good understanding of what the impacts of biosolids land application are. So this is an area where utilities across the state, across the nation do this, and we need to have a better understanding of what the potential impacts are. And so we've worked to develop a collaborative working group with the state, local health departments, as well as researchers, particularly from UNC. There's a lot of researchers from UNC working on this to help us better understand what are the impacts of biosolids land application. What can we learn that we can make decisions from a regional or state perspective, and identifying the needs for these communities and connecting with them with the resources they need, resources about health, resources about the safety of their drinking water, and if they need treatment, what are the options there. And we all want to work to keep each other informed on that. And so again, for biosolids, we're looking at what are other methods for us to be able to dispose of those, safe, minimize its impacts, and then keep working through preparing for future regulations, as well as the potential for removal technologies. Wastewater is still, science is still very much emerging on what are your options to be able to remove PFAS from the treatment process. One of the biggest tools that utilities have right now is understand where the PFAS is coming from that's being discharged into your sewer shed, and then work with those sources to reduce those compounds. And so I'm going to skip over this slide because I think I pretty much have kind of hit, what we're looking ahead at, and kind of close with, we've talked about this, the importance of partnerships between local and state and federal levels to address water quality concerns and the safety of folks' drinking water. There's a lot of unknowns and water quality challenges out there, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration between research community, federal, state levels to be able to understand the risks, address the risks, and ensure safety for our communities. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you. Yeah.
So I'm going to invite Monica and Sushma to come up real quickly and take a few questions. If you do have a question, we invite you to stand in front of the microphone and be able to pose so we can recognize you. But to kick us off, and as tell me get some questions from the audience, Sushma, I was actually fascinated to hear about kind of the investments that you're making post-Helene. I mean, certainly as we look at, obviously hurricanes are taking a lot of attention in the news these days. Tell us a little bit about how you're deciding, as you make decisions about where you should make those investments, and you look at the resiliency and how to, protect future water quality in future disasters. How do you make those? Tell us a little bit about that decision making.
Yeah, and it's actually the Helene-related funds that I just mentioned, $600+ million, is actually a small drop in the bucket. Over the last 4 or 5 years, North Carolina has received over $6 billion in infrastructure funding from BIL, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and various other what we call SRFs, state revolving funds that comes from EPA and Congress. And we have been one of the leading states to just go after that money as many projects as we can. As you heard from Monica, the demand is high, and so what we do, we have a authority that actually is set up at the state level that operates under our guidance, and that authority has a group of folks that evaluates projects based on criteria that are set. So folks like Monica's utility would apply for these funds at 2-3 times a year, and there's procedures for that. And they could, some of it requires full funding, some of it requires partial funding. But we look at the efficacy of those projects based on those criteria and fund those projects. And sometimes they get funded partially or fully, and they're able to begin planning, begin monitoring, begin design work, eventually construction. Helene was the same way. Helene was these projects on steroids, which is the need was so immediate that as soon as we heard that Congress has passed it, we were out there in the field talking to the local communities. We held multiple workshops, and then finally we said, get ready, here's what your application requirements are going to look like. As soon as we get the money from EPA, we got the notices out, and we received 16 communities with, like I said, all of those needs were identified.
Yeah, and one thing I will just make a comment. I was impressed by certainly a good focus of, or major focus of this conference has been on water and sanitation access. And as we look about, access issues in the United States, there's a good chunk of that focus on the decentralized community. And so your investments in the decentralized, wastewater systems was impressive, and we applaud you on that. Shifting gears, let's talk PFAS for a second. I mean, certainly kind of the benchmark in the United States it's been a little bit of a moving target. Curious to, I mean, and I think, Monica, you did a wonderful job talking about what used to be a wonderful part of the whole process, these biosolids, is now, because of PFAS, is it a, pollution source. So as you're thinking about the treatment options, I mean, and plus the regulation coming down the pipeline, what are the challenges you're facing, and how are you making those decisions of what technology to invest in?
Yeah, so from the PFAS perspective, I think it's the area that we're struggling the most with right now because we don't see any what viable options for the disposal of that will be. So for liquid laminate application, again, there's some concern if that's having that potentially is having an impact on private drinking water wells. We don't know that. Is there a safe level, like if you were able to reduce the PFAS concentrations? Because I think realistically you could never have no PFAS concentrations, but is there a level which they could be reduced to where they wouldn't have a negative impact? I think that's one question. That would still allow land application to be viable. From our farmers' perspective, again, they'll have to go to fertilizers, industrial fertilizers, which come with their challenges in themselves, and for them, they can't afford to do that. And so their livelihood is impacted by that. The other options for biosolids is you can essentially dewater it so it becomes more of a solid product. It can be sent for composting, but again, composting makes its way back into the environment, so that has a negative impact. With that dewater product, you can put it into a landfill. Even with the landfill, it still ends up in the leachate, but ends up back into the environment. So right now, we don't see any solutions that will fix this long term. There is some talks about is incineration an option? Again, I think there's still some studies that need to be determined when you incinerate it, what's re-released through the air back into the environment. And then if incineration becomes a safe option, then I think that's something from a regional perspective, setting up those facilities that utilities could come to be able to dispose of it would be really important. At the end of the day, we have to stop allowing the manufacturing of PFAS compounds so they can stop making their way into the environment.
I'm getting some great applause from the audience on that one. So as you think about whether these investments, whether it be addressing PFAS or kind of post, disaster, where do you find the biggest challenges, the biggest restraints to those projects? Is it funding? Is it permitting? Is it workforce capacity? And what can, maybe from the federal or state or other levels, what can be done to help kind of remedy that challenge? A question for both of you, yeah.
You want to start?
I'll start. It's always money. Money drives a lot of decision making. It's also uncertainty. PFAS are, as Monica said, there's just so many things are unknown, but we know two things. We know that if you reduce PFAS at the source, at the manufacturing, come up with alternatives that are PFAS free, but if you can't come up with alternatives that are PFAS free, then those industries that use it, the sources that actually use that raw material, we have one PFAS manufacturer in North Carolina, one of very few in the country. It has affected 10 counties, water, land, soil, drinking water, and over 500,000 people's water is at stake from one manufacturer. But then we have a lot of industries that are using that material and creating other products and putting it as coating and other things. If those sources can reduce their discharges or air emissions, then we're not propagating that PFAS across all media, and it's almost like confetti, where you're picking up the PFAS that ends up in the wastewater, and then it ends up in biosolids, it ends up in our discharge water, that ends up in the rivers, and then ends up in the fish, and it ends up in our groundwater. So our strategy at North Carolina State Environmental Protection, our DEQ, is consistent with EPA's trying to do, which is identify those industries that are linked with PFAS and get them technologies and funding, the regulations needed to reduce that intake. So.
Yeah, I'd say funding from the local utilities perspective is certainly one of the biggest challenges, as well as are we expending these funds in the right long-term solutions? So in my career, I've never seen a regulation progress so quickly and progress so much in a way that we don't have all the answers yet. So we have the 3 best available technologies, but part of our thought process has been, what if there's something out there that's better? You know, what if there's something out there that is a technology that would be cheaper and that could better meet our needs? At the rate at which the technologies or the regulations are progressing, we're just going to make the decisions with the best information that we have at hand. And then from our perspective, I think one of the challenges is we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but that comes at a cost of our community. So one of the things I showed you was that with the powder activated carbon, that's meeting the need now. We could completely use that as our long-term solution, but there's still that impact back into the environment. And if we do what we have to do, we can still do that until regulations pick up from the wastewater perspective. We want to look at things from a long-term perspective. So implementing what we know now is important, and it helps protect public health. But I think one of our concerns is this the best solution for us to be implementing?
Well, I can't say I envy you the challenges you both face, but I appreciate both of your work in helping to not only the water quality here in our local community, but across the state, and certainly the voices you play kind of a larger role in the federal scene as well. Thank you so much for taking time and sitting your presentations. Oh, I do have a question. I'm so sorry. I didn't even look up.
That's okay.
That's my apologies.
If I
Go
have
ahead.
time.
Go ahead.
Okay, sweet. Hi there. Good morning. Really great presentation. My name's Taylor. I work at Tucson Water in compliance. And you mentioned that there are some utilities, or not utilities, but companies that still produce PFAS, and that's surprising to me. And I'm wondering if, because funding is an issue, at Tucson Water, we have held the International Airport accountable for their historic discharges of PFAS and using AFFF foam, and they pay for our PFAS remediation. So I'm wondering if that isn't a solution that you guys have considered, is having these industries accountable. And then 2, I'm just curious what a flooding resilient utility would look like. So you're looking to build back, but what does that look like for you guys?
Let me quickly go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so your first
I'm not
one-
going to answer that one.
I'll answer the last question, which is, what does that resilient future utility look like? So when I was out at Hot Springs, one of the things that I saw was that their entire electric motor system was underwater. When your power goes out, you can't do anything. So they moved that substation, that motor station, to a higher grounds. Another thing they did was the funding that's going to support is they're moving the pump stations to higher elevations. It's what we do at the coast. You know, move it above ground, get it out of the way, put the piping infrastructure that is not in a flood-prone area. And those are the kind of things that they're doing right now. And something that's not going to be just completely replace the plant to a different location. At the North River plant in Asheville, they have put in a dam coffer system that actually has when the dam is overtopping, they have a spillway engineered solution to get some of that pressure out of the way. And they had to release one of the coffer dams spillways open to get that pressure out, so the town of Biltmore couldn't be flooded. I mean, this was designed, and it won the national award for the resilient dam infrastructure concept. So those are the kind of innovation that is happening today in North Carolina. To answer your other question, yes, PFAS are being manufactured, although PFOA and PFAS, which are what we call the legacy long chain compounds, are phased out. They're not completely stopped by any regulations, but companies are phasing out. We're finding that in our water because it's in everything else. But the shorter chain compounds, which has replaced those long chain compounds, are still being manufactured. And one of those companies is right here in Bladen County, North Carolina. And that company is under a consent agreement, court order, to clean up. And my team spends enormous amount of time and effort. Just last month, we required the company to test an additional 15,000 wells in the New Hanover, Brunswick County area. Their contamination has gone from Fayetteville, Cumberland County area all the way down to the coast. And if you look at our website, you'll see the extent of contamination. It's an ongoing work.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'll give you 15 seconds, and we need to wrap up for the next panel.
So what I was going to say is there's also, there is some litigation out on these communities that, or these companies that are producing them. The settlements are coming in from OWASA's perspective. We participated in that. We were receiving somewhere around $4 million of a settlement with that. You know, it's helpful, certainly doesn't touch the $90 million that we're looking at spending. And then just from the flooding perspective, you know, certainly it's important to get infrastructure out of the floodplains. These were 1,000-year events, and they're not something that utilities are particularly planning for 1,000-year storm events. We're typically planning for 10, 100-year storm events. But when you do put the infrastructure back, making sure that you're regularly investing in replacement of it as it ages. So OWASA was very fortunate with Tropical Storm Somtel. We had 2 breaks, and that was amazing considering what happened, and we think that a big part of that is because we are regularly investing in our infrastructure and ensuring that it's resilient.
Well, wonderful. Sorry, we're going to have to cut you off to get to the second panel, but thank you both. I appreciate it. I encourage you to find the speakers afterwards. So join me in thanking Sushma and Monica. I'll turn it over to Ginny Redmond.
Wow, those were really wonderful presentations. And as a resident of North Carolina and living near here, I'm so heartened to hear of all of the things that are continuing to happen. And this really just exemplifies the fact that just because we live in a, quote, higher income country, it doesn't mean that we don't have significant drinking water quality challenges. And it really is a one water approach. As they continue to show, it goes from water access to resource use to what's happening with extreme events and infrastructure and how that all comes together to go into our glass so we can have safe drinking water. So I'm going to reorient us now. So we had a really good perspective of what's happening with the interconnection between local, state, and federal work that has to happen on a daily basis to provide the water that we have right here today. And I'm going to show, you know, these are 2 graphics to just show that there's essentially 2 ways, for the most part, in higher income countries that we receive our water. And one is with a private well, and there are well users across North Carolina and across the US. It's about 17% of people that can be from a community well, but often from one well per household, or from municipalities like Monica's talking about with the OWASA authority today. Now, both of those have the source water that's coming in. And what we often think about in terms of water contamination is contamination in source water. And this is definitely an issue in PFAS, and Emanuele is going to be going over this shortly. Then for private well users and municipalities, everybody has that piping and plumbing that goes into the household where you get your water from. And that can become an issue for lead and copper in particular. And Ed Norman is going to be going over the challenges of lead in our water infrastructure. And then in between, for municipalities, there's those water system treatment considerations Monica already so aptly went over, and how do we store water. So from water quality contaminant perspective, we're trying to ensure that we have proper integrity. And these are really the 4 things that we have to consider. So in source water, in low to middle income countries, we're focused a lot of times on microbiological concerns, E. coli, that sort of thing. But then there's also naturally occurring risks in source water that includes inorganics such as arsenic, and then synthetic compounds that are so pervasive, the PFAS that we're going to be talking about today are a prime example. Disinfection byproducts can be a concern for both municipalities and private well users if they're disinfecting at their household and they're using too much chlorine, for example. The distribution, piping, and plumbing That's a lead concern predominantly from a health perspective, but we look at both lead and copper. And then Amari is going to be talking about what happens when people don't actually believe in or trust their water, and the increasing usage of bottled water, sometimes in areas because there's not access to water, especially like after Hurricane Helene, which was discussed, but also because people might have water and they can turn it on in their tap, but they don't believe that it's safe, so they're using bottled water. And that contributes to microplastics usage when you're drinking the bottled water itself, but also this life cycle issue, very similar to the life cycle issue Monica was talking about with PFAS, and it just keeps, the circle keeps going around and around, and we're more exposed. And so with that, I will start with Emanuele, who's going to go over the state of the science on PFAS. And then we're going to follow with Amari, who's talking about microplastics, and Ed Norman, who will be talking about lead and also cumulative risks of lead exposure, which cut from drinking water to applesauce. And he'll share how.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Emanuele here. I used to be Water Institute, then DQ. This lady here was my boss. I don't remember how many. Anyway, and now I'm with RTI. Okay, so I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter, so maybe we have a minute for the gentleman to ask his question later. I'll give you a 600 seconds overview about the state of the science in PFAS. And the good news is that Monica has already covered part of this, so I can skip through some slides. Quickly to start, how many of you are from utilities? Just raise your hand. Working for utility, just one? Okay. Government? 1, 2, oh, a couple more. Academia, like postdoc students? Oh, wow. Professors? Private? Foundations? Good. Okay. Tailoring a little bit where we are. I think Monica covered part of that, so we are all good, I think, with the definitions. PFAS, very prevalent since the 40s, that's Raleigh in the 40s, actually. On top, you can see the classical PFAS structure. They are pretty much prevalent everywhere. The more you search, the more you find them. If there is time, we'll tell you a little bit more about different matrices where we at RTI are trying to quantify PFAS, and you pretty much find it everywhere. The same reason why PFAS are so useful, the same properties are, unfortunately, you have heard that, the reasons why they are so pervasive in the environment and in the human body, right? So, in order to remember why they are so relevant and kind of a public health concern, I just developed this little acronym. It's not great, but it works with me. Bing wipe, like it's a bingo, and a wipe like a wipe. So the BI, the bioaccumulation, okay? So the bioaccumulation is basically, you may have heard that PFAS, once it enters your body, it never leaves. I kind of disagree with that. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I see this as a mass balance, right? It's a mass balance. There is an input, there is an output. But the problem is that, pardon that, the mass balance is kind of unbalanced, like the input and the output, they don't really match, and that's why we talk about bioaccumulation. Numerous exposures, we kind of covered that, right? And the growing number of PFAS, Monica has touched a little bit on that, and Sushma too. A few of them are phased out, but the number of new compounds that come into the game, it tends to be much higher than the ones that are phased out, unfortunately. And then the wipe, right? The widespread occurrence, again, if there is time, we'll tell you a little bit more where we are looking for PFAS. You can interrupt me when it comes to PFAS in beer. The point is that pretty much any time you look for PFAS, you kind of find it because our diagnostic systems are so advanced, right? And then the persistence, right? It stays in the body and environment for a really, really long time. Now, this is the slide that Monica pretty much already covered, and I thought your slide was better than mine, so I'm gonna pretty much skip through this, and I think the audience is very knowledgeable about that. She kind of covered the entry routes and the removal part. If there is a little bit of time, I'll tell you more about the reason why it's so difficult to remove with conventional water treatment methods, and we'll go into the health risk and the regulations, how they have changed. I think Sushma has already touched on that. Now, PFAS health effects, right? You probably heard the majority of those. There are a couple of references here. If there is time, just come at the end and we'll go through them. But the point is that it affects a lot of organs. It goes from the thyroid, so hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, liver damages, kidney cancer, the respiratory system. You may have noticed that one of the most prevalent words here is DNA disruptor or cancer, right? And then one that came in the news fairly frequently was the issue of decreased fertility, both on men and women. Okay, I don't think there is that much more to add to make the case that it's important to try to do the best we can to regulate those compounds and try to reduce their production as much as we can. Pretty much all of you have heard from the news that there has been a big change with the new administration, right? May 14, 2025, the PFAS rule is still in place, but I think the wording on the EPA website is that some of the, actually 4 out of the 6 compounds that were previously regulated, the word there is reconsider. I think reconsider and resign. So P4 and PFOS still untouched the regulation. Too bad that they are the legacy PFAS, so they kind of are already been phased out. But when it comes to GenX, PFNA, PFHXS, and PFBS and the other index, those as of right now, they are not strictly regulated as they used to be, okay? And another important thing that has been touched is the deadlines, and it appears to me that the landscape, that's difficult to predict, but the landscape of funding may change a little bit in the medium long term, and more and more exceptions could be done for public water systems that face challenges. Sushma is here, she knows this better than me, we can discuss about that. Now, I really liked your part, Monica, about the technologies. There is not enough time to go into that. I'm very excited about not just what is going on right now, which are the 3 that you see on the left here, like the classical granular activated carbon, ion exchange resins, reverse osmosis. Have a look at the box here on the right. I try to recap a little bit the difference when it comes to installation cost, operational cost, and just the cost per cubic meter of water treated. The point is that granular activated carbon will continue to be very much present. I touched on that with my final take. I think personally, that's just me, even with the current regulation that has been modified, there may be a bottleneck because there is only so much granular activated carbon and PAC we can produce and we can regenerate in this country in a relatively short period of time. If you can pay for that, obviously reverse osmosis, it has higher performance. You may have noticed on the left, I talk a little bit about long versus short chain and why the ion exchange resins are slowly getting a little bit of an advantage because of their ability to be effective with short chain PFAS. But none of those technology, at least the top 3, which are the most used, have no issues, right? Even the reverse osmosis, if you can pay for that, is not that the PFAS, the bond that I showed you at the beginning is gonna be destroyed, right? The only ones that would be able to work on the destruction of the bonds are the one that you see, some of the one you see at the very bottom. The problem is that, as far as I know, and probably Sushma knows this better than I do, I am aware of one single case locally where they try to test it on a real scale plant, and that was still a pilot. The bottom line is that even with the current updated regulations, the process for the utilities, and Monica, you tell me if there's anything I missed, but basically when it comes to PFAS regulation, the utility will continue pretty much the same process. They will be forced to monitor. If above the MCL, they will be encouraged to apply for funding, which are state, but ultimately come from federal funding and implement treatment technology for the reduction of PFAS. You may have noticed, I removed the hazard index from the left block, and I highlighted in yellow the federal funding part. I'll touch it at the end because that landscape is changing a little bit, right? Emerging versus declining technology. Granular activated carbon is going to be there, but it's more and more supplemented by ion exchange resins and RO. If there is time, I would love to talk a little about the emerging one. Those are the only one that would be really sustainable in the long term because they touch the bond, but they are very expensive, and that's where it comes to the funding point. If you want, you can take a picture of those QR codes. It's a little bit of a recap of all the work that Jenny and others at RTI have done on PFAS in different matrices. If you're interested in the one about beer, look at it on the right. You want to say anything on that? No, we're good, we're good. Okay, I have 1 minute left for my take. I called it a slowly changing set of PFAS compounds and a rapidly changing regulatory landscape. I say slowly changing set of PFAS compounds because they keep coming into the game, but obviously it doesn't happen from a day to the next. We don't need to say too much about the regulatory landscape changing. There are a few things that are actually difficult to predict. And I think we can close with just a comment on the fact that even with an extended deadline, at some point we need to have a discussion about how are we going to manage the production and the regeneration, quote unquote, of all this granular activated carbon. We need to keep up with the rules. Are we good? We're good?
Just under the wire.
Perfect. Thank you.
Huge thank you to Emanuele, who leads our PFAS work at RTI International in our laboratory and engineering area. So next we're going to be talking with Amari Walker-Franklin, who is a global expert on microplastics and literally wrote the book on microplastics.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you all. So today I'm going to talk about microplastics, but I'm also going to put in a plug since we've been talking about Hurricane Helene a little bit. We actually just published a paper on contaminants of emerging concern in the French Broad River as an aftermath of Hurricane Helene. So it's in Toxics. Come find me if you want the link. But yes, I am a research scientist that focuses on microplastics and other emerging contaminants using a variety of instruments. But really, why are we worried about microplastics and what are they? Microplastics are defined as small pieces of plastic, smaller than probably the diameter of a pencil eraser tip, all the way down to the 16th of a human hair. So it's a broad size range, and it's made of so many different kinds of polymers themselves. There's over thousands of different formulations of plastics. So it represents a very complex class of contaminants. We can find them as either primary sources, things like glitter, things that we find in like eyeshadows, to intentionally made microbeads. They've been banned for a while, from cosmetics and other body wash products, to the majority of them coming from the degradation of larger plastics. So you can see from this figure that macroplastic degradation, whether that's exposure to water, to air, to light, to even mechanical processes like going through our washer machine or going through like our laundry processes, to the process of recycling plastics can generate microplastics. And those make up the large majority of those that end up in various places like our landfills, but also our environments. Another large fraction of that includes our tires. So those that, we lose tread on tires. We have to replace them every couple of years, right? And that's just because we're generating these tire microplastics that end up on our roadways. We actually walk them into rooms with our shoes, and they have unknown impacts from our own exposure. So really, they're complex in their sizes, they're complex in their shapes, including textile fibers. to even just being spherical particles. And they can also have different surface charges that we don't really fully understand their implications in our environment and with the human body. Now, one of the reasons why we're so concerned about them is that they're very persistent. So we're finding them just about anywhere we look, and they can take a very long time to degrade, anywhere from decades to thousands of years. We don't really fully know the process other than we go from microplastic to nanoplastic, so anything smaller than a micron, to what we assume to be the oligomer, to the monomer, and then hopefully to mineralization like carbon dioxide and water. But those are very hard to model on these large time scales. So the majority of microplastics are assumed to accumulate in our terrestrial zones like our landfills, but we can find them all over the world because of how light they are, especially fibers. They can be transported globally through our air, through our waterways, and then also wildlife carrying plastic with them. Some wildlife actually preferentially chooses plastics, like sea turtles are attracted to bags in the ocean because they look like jellyfish. To seagulls that think that those shiny, bright plastic caps are something worth consuming. So there's studies showing the fact that you can pick up some seabirds and they crunch because of how much plastic is in their stomachs. Yeah, so it's not just, there's a lot of kinds of plastics that can be transported and that we're really worried about. And we don't really know what the full effect is, but I think I'll skip also to, since this is a water quality talk too, just how pervasive is it in our water systems themselves. So there hasn't been as much done within a drinking water system compared to surface waters. And really it depends on where you're looking. This is one of the main studies I've really seen within surface waters in the US. And those ranges can be, up to 12 microplastics per liter for, I think that was the Hudson maybe. But when you look in other parts of the world, we can see even higher ranges from dozens to hundreds of microplastics per liter. And some of the challenges that we have are really analytical. One, it's really hard to go down really small. So smaller than 50 microns has been a real challenge for us to detect microplastics or nanoplastics. And then two, just the types of techniques that we have to use to confirm that it's a polymer can be very expensive and require expertise. So you can even see here that the size ranges that they're looking at really vary depending on the study. So some of them only go down to 300 microns. But we know that as you get smaller and smaller, you're generating more and more particles, right? So the assumption that there's far more than we're actually quantitating in these samples. And then you can see from some of these drinking water studies in other countries, they are finding a wide variety. Some of the averages, 400 microplastic particles per liter in some drinking water samples in China, to they looked at tap water faucets in New Mexico or Mexico City, and they could find up to 100 microplastic particles per liter. And what really is unique about the drinking water is also just the types of plastics that we're finding. When we see the faucet water tested, we see things like epoxies or polyesters or PVC, and those might be indicative of the drinking water pipes, the faucets themselves also releasing microplastics directly into the water. To if you're looking at bottled water, sometimes that's just tap water being bottled, so you're adding more potential introduction of other particles of concern. And so those can range even into the thousands of microplastics that you're exposed to. And one recent study that actually looked for nanoplastics found up to 240,000 particles per liter of bottled water. And so that's one of the first, and I'm sure there'll be many more, trying to look at what the difference is in exposure for microplastics and nanoplastics in our water system. When we think about microplastics, we worry about them for a variety of different reasons. One, it's just that they're so small that they can be transported to different parts of our body or different parts of our environment. And we wonder if it's a particle toxicity that could be potentially there, just from maybe causing inflammation or aggravating a surface or tearing if it's super jagged or fragmented, to even its surface charge, because there are some ways that you can actually be pulled into different parts of the body depending on your charge. The next is the idea of it acting as a Trojan horse or a vector for other contaminants of concern. So that can include pathogenic bacteria and viruses, but it can also include the chemicals that it was incorporated with. So we know that plastics are made of thousands of different formulations of polymers, but they also can have a variety of different plastic additives placed within them. So the same polypropylene bottle is not the same as the next one. You can even tell just from the colors, right? There's different chemical additives placed in each bottle because they're all trade secrets. So we really, we know that there's about at least 16,000 different chemicals associated with plastics, but about 25% of them really have had some toxicology data. There's not a lot that's been known about what are the toxicological impacts of these chemicals. Perfect. And then also the fact that we have a lot of legacy contaminants too, or other contaminants like PFAS that can be both incorporated into plastics or can be a plastic, and can be absorbed to the polymer and be transported as well, just like heavy metals and other organic pollutants. So if you think about the spaghetti stains on your Tupperware, that's exactly the visual of why plastic is so easy to transport different things to different parts of our world. And then finally, there are some health studies that have been done. Most of them have been within in vitro cell culture systems. This is a really rapidly growing field. What we know is that there are some early links to potential reproductive impacts, some inflammatory bowel disease, some links to even heart attack and cancer, but really it hasn't been pinpointed because microplastics is so complex, so many different polymer types, that it's hard to say that this is, causing a specific effect. But we are starting to realize that there's definitely some associations with things like inflammation and other challenges. So I wanted to just really quickly touch on how do we get rid of it in our water systems? And I'd say that a lot of the conventional methods are very effective when we think about larger size, microplastics as a class. Even some nanoplastics, they're showing that reverse osmosis and nanofiltration can be very effective, along with granular activated carbon can be an effective method to remove a decent amount of microplastics. But there are other methods that can actually increase and generate more nano and microplastics, like ozonation or UV treatment, because like I said, the exposure to light, especially in other chemical reactions, can degrade these particles into smaller and more particles. So, some quick takeaways from this is that there are common drinking water methods can be effective, but it really depends on the size range. Bottled water has a very large concentration of microplastics for exposure. And we really don't have a full understanding of nanoplastics as a class because it's so small and we have technological challenges. So we've got more to do, not just from assessment, but also understanding human health impacts. And I'll just throw out here the risk perception too, because when we think about water that we expose ourselves to, if it smells funny, we don't want it, but we choose a bottled water that looks, perceptibly better, but we're actually exposing ourselves to potentially more things. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Amari. I wonder if you're all are like, so what do you do in your personal life? And if you stay, so at 10 is a break. So what I'd like to propose is that we're about to have a leader in children's environmental health and lead poisoning prevention who's worked for decades. So Ed's going to come up to talk, and then we'll still have the panelists come up because we do have a break period. And when that panel starts, I will ask each individual what they personally do in their own lifetime experience to help themselves feel good about what they're doing day to day for water quality. Since we all are in this space, that's something I always like to ask everybody. And so now we'll go ahead and have Ed Norman come up, who is the program manager for the state of North Carolina Lead Poisoning Prevention and Children's Environmental Health Unit. Here, go ahead.
Ah, the winter beard. Yes, it's just starting. Well, I have worked for quite a while with the state health department. I was actually hired in 1990. I worked in Diener, which is the predecessor of DEQ back when we were all located in one agency. And I was hired as one of two epidemiologists to work on the new project that had just received legislative authority, statutory authority, and that was the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program. I'll talk a little bit about how that operates. We primarily are focused on encouraging the testing of children. That's my primary mission, and then the application of interventions for those children that have elevated exposures. For the past couple of years, we've tested almost 160,000 children, preschool-aged children. More than 90% actually of those children have been toddlers, 1 and 2 year olds. So that's our primary target group, and that's just because of their normal behavioral patterns, their hand-to-mouth activity, which puts them at greater risk to the known exposures to lead. Water being one, but primarily we've focused on things like lead-based paint for the last 30-plus years because of the higher concentrations that are seen in lead should the children expose themselves through hand-to-mouth activity. That program has advanced. We have been involved in water on an ad hoc basis, as I'll explain a little later on. But what happens is we receive all of the clinical tests that are conducted on children. It's a blood lead test, a finger stick typically, that's conducted by their regular doctor. It's part of their annual well child visit. That's all reported to my agency. We process all that data, comes in all kinds of formats, so I have a team of epidemiologists that work on that data. And for those children with elevated exposures that have triggered an action level, which has basically been defined by the Centers for Disease Control, we provide an environmental intervention. The primary intervention that we coordinate is a home investigation for those children. We also regulate child care centers and schools, so we conduct investigations at those locations as well. I have a team of 12 state inspectors, and there are 85 local health departments. Most of the work done by the Division of Public Health is implemented through those 85 local health departments, county and district local health departments. We provide training to the local inspectors. We evaluate them and authorize them to implement state laws. The most familiar in the environmental health area that you would be familiar with would be things like restaurant inspections, but also septic tank systems. They design and enforce, proper construction and installation of septic tank systems for both new housing and for repairs. So, as I mentioned, we have long been involved with lead poisoning prevention. We've only been involved in water in a big scale for the last several years. During those home investigations that my staff conduct, I mentioned there are 160,000 children a year tested. About 600 children for the past couple of years, a little more than that, have been identified with confirmed elevated exposures that were eligible for those investigations. And in all those investigations, we do collect water samples, typically from the kitchen sink or the family's going to use for drinking water. But in a child care center or in a school, we may collect dozens of samples depending on where they're using water in those facilities. As a result of that, we do identify children that have exposure to elevated sources of water. Although I will say that over the course of the 30-plus years I've been working in this field, roughly 70% of lead poisoning of children that we've identified, we have attributed primarily to lead-based paint. That's not to say water was not a contributing factor in many of those cases. It certainly was. If you look at some of the EPA data, it's estimated that up to 10% of a typical child's exposure, cumulative exposure, would be from water, and can be much more than that, in specific instances. More recently, we have gotten funding from initially the EPA through something called the Water Infrastructure Improvement for the Nation grant program. And as a result of that, and really that became a reality because of things that happened in Flint, Michigan back in 2016, where public water system, lots of changes were made to it that resulted in exposure through the public water system to children at their home tap. Our legislature wanted to address that issue. They didn't really want to spend any money on it, but it became an issue that was discussed in some legislative committees. We came up with what I think ended up being a very good plan to address it, and that's where I first met some of the other, our partners in this endeavor, Jenny Redmond from RTI International, as well as folks from NC Child, an advocacy group that was very instrumental in getting us what became an administrative rule rather than statutory changes, as none of those legislative efforts ever came to fruition. Through our work with the EPA funding, with the WIN grant, we were able to test every single licensed child care center in the state. There's more than 4,000 larger child care centers. And in fact, through expanded funding that we've received now through ARPA, one of the federal infrastructure programs that was passed during the pandemic, we have expanded that program dramatically. We received $150 million to conduct water testing, not just in child care facilities, which we had focused on initially because of the large percentage of 1- and 2-year-olds that are in those facilities, but also to schools, public schools, and it's also expanded to beyond water. We are testing not only the drinking water taps at all those facilities, but also lead-based paint and asbestos at those facilities. All of those programs I regulate through our agency in the Division of Public Health. And for the first time ever, really, for public health, we actually received mitigation funding through the ARPA program, and we are busy now, very much so, both through RTI efforts. They're coordinating our mitigation program for drinking water. We're primarily replacing drinking water faucets and installing filters at public schools and at child care facilities, but also on a reimbursement program that we have for schools and child care facilities that are abating lead-based paint hazards and asbestos hazards. And that's our real promise. We've only got a little over a year left in that program, and we've still got quite a bit of mitigation funding to spend. It looks like we're going to end up testing all of the water as well as lead-based paint and asbestos at all of the public schools. We'll have a great documentation of all the hazards that exist at those facilities, and hopefully many of them will take advantage of that to abate those hazards. As a result, we've tested almost 9,000 centers. Now that's duplicate because this is the second round of testing. Remember, we had the funding from the EPA, and then we got the funding from ARPA. An enormously high number of those facilities, over 10%, have had at least one tap that had an elevation. Typically, it's not facility-wide. These are individual drinking water faucets that we're finding that are containing lead or leaching lead at a level. We use a 10 part per billion action level for our mitigation requirements. And then we've tested now almost 2/3 of the schools, or maybe that's closer to 70%. And even a higher, percentage of those facilities, probably because they have a lot more drinking water fountains at those facilities, have had elevations. And we've done a number of mitigations at both of those types of facilities. Just very briefly, one of the things that we do in our primary work when we go to a child's home, we're looking for hazards, we're looking for lead paint, we're looking for water. Well, when we can't find the usual suspects, we start looking everywhere. And one thing that's been of concern in past years has been spices, especially from the Indian subcontinent, families with heritage from there. And as a result of that, we now collect food intake data for children who are lead poisoned. And amazingly, we discovered within a year of the release of this new product, Wannabana's cinnamon applesauce. Just through our routine investigations for kids, we were able to identify this as a new source. Over 500 kids have been verified, were poisoned by this nationwide. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could tell you a lot more about this investigation, FDA involvement and that sort of thing, but I want to try to wrap it up here so that we have time for discussion. And that's pretty much it.
And Amari, Ed, and Emanuela, if you'd like to go up and sit there, and we'll do a panel, and if anybody would like to come up to ask any questions, you could go up to the microphone to stand in line. I will start by asking what each person does when you wake up in the morning and you're thirsty. Where do you get your water?
I can go first.
You go first.
Well, I run the tap. And we've eliminated plastics pretty much from our kitchen in terms of, both storage and for any kind of water product or drinking product.
Yeah, same. I use my tap water that's been filtered. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually have to admit that I filter my water twice. I'm kind of a little bit OCD through my filter fridge and I'm not supposed to say the commercial product, my carafe, but now I'm going to buy a reverse osmosis system because of the recent changes in the rules, and that's where I'm going to stop. I know the gentleman had a question before, right? But anyway, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you.
So I'm Jeremy with Wine to Water. Asheville is home, so thank you guys. We've tested 1,100 private systems across Western North Carolina. 40% of them are contaminated, mostly with biological contaminations. We haven't got into PFAS and other non-normative testing that we don't have resources for yet, but we are moving in that direction. I'm curious, we've talked about municipal systems and larger systems where larger quantities of, or larger numbers can be taken care of in one swoop. But what kinds of interventions would you recommend for these private systems where we're seeing large numbers of contamination?
Like you're talking about both microbial and chemical?
Coliform, E. coli, or the major.
So microbial.
Those are the major. We do have manganese, lead, and other contaminants, but they're not as common in what we're finding. And I'll also say I would love the link because we're so close to the French Broad. My former office was one of the emerging contaminants that may have been found. We were stationed right on the river, and when the floods came through, it completely wiped us out. So definitely a lot of impact. But I do have a follow-up question, and maybe for afterwards, but as we're talking about sanitation systems, sewage systems, private systems especially, like we know our water systems were hit because those are pressurized systems. I'm very concerned about the contamination coming out of private septic systems where tree roots that came up when we lost, I think, between 40 and 60% of our trees, damaged these systems, and we don't know what contaminants are directly feeding into our groundwater. So I'd love to talk to you guys after maybe about that in more detail. So thank you.
Thanks for that question. I'm not sure if I can speak directly to the best way to clean up all of that within a well water system, but I'll say that at least from what we did with the French Broad, it was still very preliminary, but we could see specific locations like Marshall, North Carolina, along the French Broad that were hit, especially because there was open sewage that was just pouring directly into that water site. So we were like, yep, this lights up, biologically and chemically. So yeah, I think that it's going to be a big issue, and having some resources at least to start doing some broad surveillance will be important. But I'll say that we are collaborating with UNC and NC State to start serving some private wells for PFAS and other emerging contaminants. So some things are happening, but we can always do more.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, there's a different with the extreme events. We would recommend people ask us for testing after an extreme event, because things can change even if your water was previously good. But for kind of consistency, when there's water filter usage, it can be beneficial to also have UV on that so that you don't have bacterial issues that develop. And then for people that do have whole house systems, like in some of the areas where there's been PFAS manufacturing, it's really important to flush those systems or your household can have a lot of bacteria problems.
Yeah, and we don't have time to go into the detail. I'd love to, but with the UV, it's great, the UV, but it gets tricky because after extreme weather events, you have higher level of turbidity, so it becomes less effective. It's kind of complicated, but yeah, just adding more food for thought on the table. Yeah, and yeah.
I would just
reach out.
Oh, sorry.
No.
I would just encourage you to attend the 1:30 session. My boss, Larry Michael, and a couple of coworkers are going to be talking specifically about what happened in first sanitation response.
I will say we are using UV. We are trying to shock systems first.
Yeah.
We also have spring box damage that's happened. Spring boxes, obviously you can't treat that way, so that's definitely a UV. But we've also, you talked about rivers moving. We've had springs completely dry up and move locations, and so we've got households that have completely lost water and still don't have water. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of dynamics in Western North Carolina still. Life as normal has returned, but there's still a lot of households that are still struggling.
Thank you for that. And yeah, thanks, Ed, for shouting out the Hurricane Helene session later. I think will be really illustrative to all of the extreme weather event issues. Anna, did you want to ask your question?
A super quick follow-up to Jenny's question about what kind of household filters you all use. If you're using like whole house reverse
Can you say it a little louder?
Sorry, yeah, just what kind of household filters are you guys using?
Which household filter,
Yeah.
or if you could say the type of
Right.
filter, not the name.
We are not going to say commercial names.
Yeah, sorry, no, I mean like.
Okay,
I'm
you go
just saying
first.
Whole house.
I think it's either a charcoal filter. It's on my fridge, so it's whatever is the recommended one on
Yeah.
my fridge. But I will say that, like, as far as if we're thinking about microplastics, it's more so like, are you microwaving a plastic bag?
Yeah.
Are you getting takeout every day? There's studies that show that like people that eat takeout multiple times a week have higher fecal microplastic count. So it's it's more holistic than just water exposure.
Yeah, and if I may say just one more thing added to the takeout, I think we all tend to get overwhelmed nowadays. There are just so many things to do, right? I mean, at some point you have to eat something. So I've been asked this question so many times about water. You have to pick your 2-3 priorities. Personally, I think even water is important, but even before I start thinking about the water, if you can cook your own meal, that's major when it comes to PFAS. That's major because really the takeout boxes are, I think they are very poorly regulated, if regulated at all. So there are so many parallels between the work Imare does and the work we do, microplastic and PFAS. So that's another tip.
Great points, yes. Things that we can do and control in our everyday environment, super important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do one more question, and then we'll close, and I'll have a slide with everybody's info for any other follow-up, or you can come up at the end.
Great, thank you so much for staying after time. I actually work normally in the international sector, but I live in Denver, and Denver Water has done this incredible initiative where they're sending out lead test kits, and I'm a nerd, and my partner also is big into water. And so we tested our own water through their service and found out, fortunately, that we didn't have lead. But in the interim, they were sending anyone in potentially affected areas filters who, I won't name the brand, but they were providing these filters that filtered carbon or lead as well. I'm wondering, what other initiatives are you doing just in outreach or in testing that is involving the public? And I thought this was like very innovative, and I don't know what's being done in other parts of the country.
Good Jenny question.
You want to add? Do you want to start?
Yeah, for lead, the project that we're doing with our WIN grant and with our ARPA funding is all based on that type of citizen science. RTI's developed a whole system where they are mailing out test kits, and I've heard some about the project in Denver, and it's a similar thing. That I think ours is a little bit more extensive in terms of the facilities that we're looking at, and the public availability of that data that they've set up through a public mapper, which provides, availability to any parent, of a child that's at one of those schools or childcare facilities. Do you want to say any more about the citizens?
Yeah, I'll just note that, you can see in the news, like Newark, New Jersey, pre-COVID, BC, also provided filters, right, to residents when they were grappling with the longer-term lead service line replacements that were needing to happen. Some of the issues with some of the free filters that get handed out sometimes is they can be sponsored or they can be really more of a short-term measure. And so it's really important for residents to understand, like, what is the lifetime of this filter? And if it's a faucet mount filter, like the ones that were originally provided to residents in Newark, those might actually only last for a day or days, but not a long time if you have high lead levels coming in and there's that much activated carbon in it,
Right.
versus if you have a point of use under the sink activated carbon filter with several blocks, that's going to last longer. And then when we're looking at school systems and childcare centers where there's significantly more water used per tap, and in infant rooms where you're filling formula for that, it's really imperative to make sure that the filters are working for the lifetime that you would expect a reasonable replacement of it. So like 6 months is kind of what people think about, but actually if your volume usage goes up, it has to be sooner. But then with faucet mounts or pitcher filters, it can be on the order of a few days, which ends up being as costly or more costly than buying bottled water. So that's essentially why we do recommend for longer term usage to use point of use filters under the sink, ideally. And it's a little bit more challenging for facilities to offer that a lot of times, especially it's a concern for renters. So
Yeah.
leave that.
And Sushma mentioned about the long chain versus short chain PFAS. We don't have time to go into that, but for Anna, that's also a point to keep into account. I love like pitcher filters, I use it myself, but at some point the short chain PFAS are much more tricky to deal with. So just food for thought. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to close up, and thank you so much for attending today. Here's everybody's information that participated in this session. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, feel free to reach out to one or more of us. And you can also come up if you want to chat further. Thank you so much.